Hey everyone, welcome to Gen X Marks the Spot. This week I have a case that I've been following for quite a while. This is a case that actually took place December of 2000, so almost 24 years ago in the state of Florida, and that is the murder of Mike Williams. This one, I'm only bringing it out now because it wasn't actually completely settled until 2020. And even then, there's still more questions. So I really wanted to talk about this with you, show you what's happened. And it's just a very interesting story, in my opinion. So let's dive in, shall we? Jerry Michael Williams, also known as Mike, grew up in Bradfordville, Florida. It's a small town north of Tallahassee. His father was a Greyhound truck driver, and his mom was a stay-at-home mom, but she also ran an in-house daycare center for neighborhood children. They lived in a trailer park, in a double-wide trailer. They saved all of their money that they said they would spend on having a house in the suburbs or even out in the country to help both Mike and his older brother Nick attend a Christian-based private school called North Florida Christian High School. So both boys saved all their money. They worked at night at local grocery stores and excelled at school. Mike was student council president. He played football and he was active in the Key Club. At the age of 15, he began duck hunting with his father and with his brother as well, and also started being friendly with and dating a fellow student by the name of Denise Merrill. Also in Mike's circle of friends was a young man by the name of Brian Winchester, who also attended school with them. Very hardworking, graduated at the top of his class. He did attend Florida State University after graduation, and he majored in political science and urban planning. But even before he graduated, he started working for 𝗙𝗂𝗶𝗰 group as a property appraisal, and the owner of the group said that he was one of the hardest working men he had ever met. And he actually had established himself there in terms of being an appraiser and in the insurance business long before he even graduated. So in the real estate industry, very hardworking. He did marry Denise Merrill in 1994. And even then, he made sure that his work life revolved around his family life. He would work long days. He would go in 6 a.m., work until 3 or 4, come home, have after school with his wife and later on their daughter 𝗟𝗔𝗓, who was born in 1999. But he would go home, have family time, and then after they went to bed, he would often go back into work and finish up for the day. He would also make time for his absolute favorite hobby, duck hunting, doing that very early in the morning and still going into work even on weekends. According to his mother, Cheryl Williams, Mike was making about $200,000 a year in the late 90s, early 2000s. Now, that's still a lot of money today, but with the purchase power being back then, this was to be the equivalent of about a $400,000 income today. So they actually bought a home in a small upscale subdivision in Bradfordsville, and that's where they intended to live and raise their daughter. So he was still very, very good friends with Brian Winchester, who also got into the insurance business. He was a life insurance salesman, independent. He was very good friends with his wife. He had married and had a son, and he was very good friends with Mike and Denise as well as his wife. They were kind of a foursome that hung out together, did things together. But as a result of their friendship, Mike did buy a $1 million life insurance policy through Brian Winchester. Now, he also had other life insurance policies also purchased through other companies as well as Winchester that was supposed to be canceled and replaced by this $1 million policy. But as we'll soon find out, that was never done. Denise handled a lot of their household bills. That was never done. You kind of see where I'm going here. So basically, just before the incident we'll be discussing, the year 2000, Mike Williams' father died, and he spent a lot of time with his mother, Cheryl, trying to console her. He would tell her that he and Denise had hit a rough patch in their marriage, but they were trying to work it out. He said that they planned to have another child as early as 2001, and they were planning to go on a Hawaiian cruise that spring, and also going to Jamaica later in the year. And they were trying to work it out. In fact, on the weekend, the morning of December 16th, 2000, which was a Saturday, Mike left work early on Friday, telling his boss that he and Denise were planning a little trip to kind of rekindle the magic. But first he was going to go duck hunting with his good friend, Brian Winchester. And so they left about dawn and went to go duck hunting. They were supposed to be, according to Denise, who later called her father about noon that same day, saying that Mike had not returned. He was supposed to be back fairly early in the morning since he had left so early, and that she hadn't heard from him. So Denise's father called Brian Winchester, who was supposedly going fishing with Mike that morning, but Brian said he hadn't seen him. So they drove around Lake Seminole, where he disappeared, or where he was supposed to be going duck hunting, looking. They didn't find any trace of Mike, but they did find his 1994 Ford Bronco near a boat launch on the Florida side. This is a little lake on the Florida-Georgia line. And basically, they became upset. They called Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation, and an all-out search was initiated. But then a storm blew in, and they initially suspended the search for the day. But as soon as the storm broke, they got back out there, and they focused on the 10 acres of the lake surrounding the cove where the Bronco was found. They soon found his fishing boat, just a little skippy, out there about 225 feet from the ramp in which they were searching in a helicopter. Also, one of Mike's friends actually went up in a helicopter as well, looking for him, and found nothing, but they did find the boat. After retrieving the boat, investigators found Mike Williams' shotgun still in his case. It had never been taken out, so he had never fired a shot, and they saw no sign of Mike Williams at all. So basically, this lake is situated between the Chattahoochee and the Flint rivers. And it is home to lots of different wildlife, including alligators, and it's fairly deep, about 12 feet deep. And it was common knowledge that if you had fallen out of a boat in that, especially if you had hunting waders on, these are large boots that come up to your knees to allow you to stand in deeper water, that the waders would have probably filled with water, and you would not have been able to get them off and would have drowned. So that was common knowledge. And so if you fell out of a boat with no one there, you were kind of done for if you had waders on. But they were confident that if he had have drowned, that he would eventually float to the top, that somehow the waders would have become detached, or his body would just bloat so much, forgive me for being graphic, and it would have eventually floated up to the top. However, as the days and weeks went by, still no body. About 10 days into the search, they did find a camouflage patterned hunting hat that Denise said Mike had been wearing, but it was not necessarily could be connected, since there was no name, nothing that made it stand out. It was just a camouflage hunting hat. It could belong to anybody, but Denise did say that he was wearing a camouflage hunting hat. So pretty much the search was discontinued in early February of 2001, and it was at that point that Denise Williams basically asked for Mike to be declared dead so that she could move on, retrieve his life insurance, and kind of move on with her life. And if Denise Williams had had her way, that would have been the end of it. However, enter Cheryl Williams, Mike's mother, who launched her own campaign to try to keep the investigation alive. This poor woman wrote everyone from the governor of Florida to the local conservation police officers, to local other law enforcement, to newspapers, television stations. She even wore a sign that said, "Please help me find my son." She purchased billboards. She would stand out in front of churches in surrounding towns looking for any information on her son. Pretty much the story and the narrative that had formed around it was that Mike Williams had fallen out of his boat, drowned, and was eaten by alligators. That was pretty much the narrative that had formed around his disappearance. Then suddenly in June of 2001, a pair of waders was found in the area that Mike disappeared, just a few yards downriver, for lack of a better way of putting it. And then a lightweight hunting jacket and a flashlight was in one of the jacket pockets, along with a hunting license with Williams' name and signature. Convenient, huh? That it was found downriver. There were no teeth marks. There was no other damage. In fact, the waders, the jacket, everything looked pretty much brand new except for being waterlogged. And so this started to raise some questions, especially in Cheryl Williams and Mike's brother Nick Williams' mind. They talked to a lot of wildlife experts, and who basically said that alligators are pretty dormant in cold weather. So from November to March, most years, even in Florida, because this is the Panhandle, this is not southern Florida, this is near the Georgia-Alabama line, still gets pretty cold, even though it's on the Gulf. It gets very, very cold. And so alligators are pretty much dormant. They don't even expend enough energy to try to eat. They're not interested in movement. They're just trying to maintain their body temperature. So they said they're pretty much just zombies in the water. And if one of them does attack a human or anything for food, particularly a human, they're not going to finish everything. They're not going to devour the whole body. There's going to be pieces that are left floating around. And certainly if that person was wearing a jacket or waders, there would be damage to that jacket and waders, and there was none. So this is why Cheryl Williams and Nick Williams and the rest of the Williams family did their own private campaign to try to keep the investigation alive. However, a court did decide to grant Denise Williams' petition to declare her husband dead, and she was able to claim that $1 million life insurance policy, along with the other $500,000 policy that had never been canceled, even though one was supposed to replace the other. And 5 years later, she married Brian Winchester. Again, see where I'm going with this? And of course, this made, and they went on to live in the same house where Denise and Mike could live. They raised Mike's daughter. And so basically, this made Cheryl and Nick Williams very, very suspicious. And for years, Cheryl and Nick Williams went on trying to get people to continue the investigation. Basically, she fielded a lot of threats from the Winchesters, saying that they would keep her from her granddaughter if she didn't stop this crusade and to let it go. Mike was dead. In fact, Cheryl Williams once said that Denise told her, "I don't want to hear Mike's name. I have to go on with my life. He's dead. Stop this." But she would not go on for even in 2008, she was still out there doing her thing, trying to get them to reinvestigate it. Finally, in 2004, she got to some sympathetic local law enforcement that did petition to reopen the investigation based on a few facts. The boat launch where the Bronco was found, where he was supposedly used to put his boat in the lake, had an underdeveloped patch of mud, yet nothing was disturbed. So there was no boat that was put off into the lake from that dock, even though his Bronco was found parked there. The storm that raged in and caused the investigation to be suspended for a day was blowing west, and the angle of the boat in which it found would have shown that it floated in from the east. The boat, after it was covered, it was discovered that the engine was off, but yet the gas tank was full. So if someone had fallen off that boat, the boat would have continued to just go in circles until it ran out of gas. So the fact that it looked like the engine had just been turned off was very, very fishy to some of the law enforcement that she talked to. And then again, they talked to wildlife experts who told them that alligators were pretty much dormant during the type of weather that we're talking about. And yeah, it leaked up to a gentleman by the name of Ronnie Austin, who is a state attorney's investigator, and he decided to dive in with some gusto. In the meantime, but sadly, by 2007, state law enforcement did close the case due to lack of evidence. Then later that year, Nick Williams found a photograph of an old .22 Ruger pistol that had been willed to Mike from their father, and it was the only firearm that Denise had not returned to the Williams after Mike was declared dead. So he asked the local law enforcement if they could please ask the Winchesters if they had this Ruger. They did have it, and they did some testing on it and found out that at some point it was fired, even though it wasn't, they couldn't necessarily pinpoint that it was fired that day, but it had been fired. So again, that's another little crack in the foundation of this case. Then in 2008, the Florida Department of Financial Services of Insurance Fraud Division decided to get involved because, you know, insurance companies, they decided to investigate this since the body was never found. And they found some irregularities in how Denise went about claiming the life insurance, that she had only mentioned to one of the life insurance companies in which she had bought policies that Mike was only declared dead. The other one, she didn't mention it. Even though this was fairly circumstantial and it didn't lead anywhere, it was still another piece of circumstantial evidence that had to be taken into consideration. And then again, we still have Cheryl Williams, still, this is as late as 2012, still petitioning for them to reopen the case. She began writing then Governor of Florida Rick Scott daily, one letter a day. She would send him and to try to get him to order state prosecutors to reopen the case. She had written about 200 letters over the course of almost a year, and then finally got a call from the local law enforcement agency asking her to stop, because all the governor's office was doing was forwarding her letters to the state investigative unit, and they were just putting them on file. Again, I can't imagine anything more tear-jerking than to find out that. And then later in 2012, Denise and Brian Winchester separated due to his reported sex addiction. She later filed for divorce in 2015, and they had to basically do an appraisal of the house in which they live, Mike and Denise's old house, in summer of 2016. And then we have the incident that blew everything up. August 5th, 2016, Brian Winchester basically took Denise Winchester hostage with a gun. He pulled up. She thought he just wanted to talk, but he forced her into a car and basically made her drive around, telling her that if she left him, he was going to kill himself. And finally, she convinced him to pull into a CVS drugstore, and she was able to get away. After she got away, she did press charges, and it was at this time that local law enforcement decided that they were going to see if they couldn't parlay this into a way to actually close the Mike Williams case as well. They arrested Brian. They charged him with kidnapping, domestic assault, armed burglary, because he took some stuff from the car, and also they allowed Denise a protection order on him, but they did say that they would not prosecute him for the murder of Mike Williams. They said they had suspicions that Mike Williams did not die by accident, and they wanted his help. If he would help them, they would make sure that he was considered immune from prosecution in that case while going easy on him in his current legal troubles. And so after spending about 502 days in jail, he was eventually sentenced to 20 years for what he had done to his ex-wife, but he did roll over on her, and he told investigators everything. So basically, he told them that he and Denise had been involved in a sexual affair since way before Mike died.
I remember at one point, myself, Mike, and Angela were at the bar, and I looked over and saw Brian and Denise together, and Brian was standing behind Denise with his arms around her.
And that they had even had some three-way exchanges with his then wife. They had discussed trying to get out of their marriages, but he didn't want to kill his wife for fear of what it would do to his son by his ex-wife. He didn't want to. He was willing to divorce. She, however, did not want to go through a divorce, knowing that because she committed adultery, she probably wouldn't get as much in the divorce. So they devised a plan to kill Mike.
Because of the way she was raised, because of her pride, I guess I can't say all the reasons, but she did not want to get divorced, but she still had a desire for us to be together, which narrowed the options. Another scenario that we came up with was Mike and I going on a hunting trip together, and there being an accident where both he and I ended up in the water, and he drowned and I did not. I had told him that we were going to go to a secret special spot to go hunting, and that he needed to bring his waders. I had to make sure that he brought his waders because the belief was there was kind of like there still is probably like a duck hunter's myth that if you fall overboard with your waders, you're going to sink really quick and drown. We got to that area that I knew was a deep area, basically stopped the boat and got him to stand up, and when he did, I pushed him into the water. I didn't know if he was trying to swim or I didn't know what was going on, but what I came to find out or eventually realized was he was taking the waders and the jacket off. And he was panicking, and I was panicking, and none of this was like going how I thought it was going to go. So I loaded my gun, and I made 1 or 2 circles around, and I ended up circling closer towards him. And he was in the water. And as I passed by, I shot him.
And it was his admission of this that allowed them to find what was left of Mike's body. So basically what happened, they went out fishing. Basically, he got Mike out onto the boat. He knocked him overboard, and hoping he would drown, Mike was able to get his waders off. So Brian then shot Mike in the head. And based on what he did, they were able to find what was left of Mike's body in the area around where the boat was found, there was an area where a lot of snapped and down trees were, and basically they found his remains down in all those snapped trees. Brian did confess that Mike was able to hold on to some of those trees to pull himself back up, and it was there that he shot him. Denise was arrested and was eventually sentenced to life in prison for murder and conspiracy to commit murder, but later on in 2020, this was thrown out, but she was sentenced to 30 years for conspiracy.
Based upon the jury, I'm sorry, Mr. Wade, anything further?
No, Your Honor.
Yes, I was prejudging based upon your comments. But based upon the jury verdict in this case, Ms. Williams, I do adjudicate you guilty of counts 1 and 2. On count 1, I sentence you to 30 years, Department of Corrections. On count 2, I sentence you to life in prison. Those sentences run concurrently. Give you credit of 275 days against each sentence. Be $2,100 fine, $105 surcharge, $420 cost, $100 cost of prosecution.
And so this is the tragic murder of Mike Williams, one that was only solved because of the diligence of the Williams family, particularly Mom Cheryl.
The weather was the coldest in years. When I went to the lake, God told me Mike was not in Lake Seminole. He didn't drown. He didn't get eaten by alligators. I had to find him and bring him home. Judge Hankinson, for the next 17 years, I made telephone calls, put up missing person signs, compiled my notes into a book, and had people post on social media for me. With the help of friends, we raised money and put up billboards. I bought ads in the Tallahassee Democrat and worked with the Twin City News, asking everyone to help me find Mike. I stood on street corners waving my picket signs with pictures of Mike on them. I was cussed out by ministers for being too close to their church. I wrote 2,600 letters to the governor of Florida asking for help in finding my son. I begged Fish and Game to do a criminal investigation. They told me Mike drowned and got eaten by alligators, and there was no need for an investigation. They laughed at me and called me crazy. 9 months after Mike disappeared, his wife, Denise, told me if I continued to seek a criminal investigation, I would lose 𝗟𝗄𝘃, my granddaughter, Mike's only child. Denise might as well have waved a red flag in front of a bull. I knew that she knew where Mike was or what happened to him.
And I hope this is a lesson to everybody that one person can have an impact if you just stick to it. And yes, and of course, Mike was shot with his father's Ruger. So with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this case. I'll be back really, really soon. And until next time, 𝗟𝘂𝗋𝗄 out.